Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Steve Jewell and I'm with Community Giving, and we're going to give people just a couple minutes to get in the room and join us for today's webinar on year-end giving strategies. Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. If you just arrived, my name is Steve Jewell. I'm with Community Giving, and we're delighted to have you with us here today as we talk about year-end giving strategies. We got two excellent resources with us, and we just want to say thank you to everybody for taking time out of your day. Today's session will be recorded, so if for some reason you have to leave in the middle of the session, we will be sending out an email. It also will be available on our website. So today we're going to be talking, as I said, about year-end giving strategies, and we hope that today really will be simply a conversation with all of you about this topic. And so we're going to have a short presentation here at the beginning, and then one of our executive directors will be leading the conversation. And if you do have questions and want to make sure we cover those questions, you can put your questions in the Q&A tab at the bottom, and we will get to them at the appropriate time here over the course of the next hour. So once again, we want to thank you for joining us and being with us today. I'd like to introduce Carol Turnow. She is the Executive Director of the Central Minnesota Community Foundation, and she will kick us off with the introduction of our first speaker. Carol.
Thanks, Steve. Well, welcome everybody. We hope that you enjoy the webinar we have prepared today. We have Paul Radeke speaking first for us. He's a certified financial planner, also considered a shareholder and market relationship manager. Paul is laser focused on bringing together the resources clients need and works diligently to provide wow experiences for their clients in St. Cloud market. His forte is building relationships with clients and becoming a trusted confidant that they turn to when faced with making key decisions for their businesses. Paul received his bachelor's degree in accounting from the University of Minnesota Duluth and a certified financial planner, as well as an accredited investment fiduciary. Paul is very involved in the community. He's on the Center Care Health Foundation Board of Directors, Independent Lifestyles Board of Directors Chair, Camp Bliss Board of Directors Chair, St. Cloud Epic Day, Alzheimer's Remember Me Fundraiser Committee, the Women's Fund Dancing with Our Stars supporter, and Greater St. Cloud Development Corporation Grow Business Team. Paul, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Carol. As Carol said, I'm with a company called BerganKDV, and we're a business services firm located across the upper Midwest. And my particular office serves people and businesses from about Highway 694 up to Canada. And just realized my video wasn't on, sorry about that. So on the agenda today, I'm covering two acts that took effect this year, as well as the stated tax plan from President-elect and what the strategies are that we're employing for our clients. So with that, we can head right into the first slides. So for the capital gains and dividends rate, Joe Biden said that he was going to eliminate the cap gains rate for any income above the 1 million mark, and that those would then coordinate better with their ordinary tax rates. So for clients that are in that category, of course, we are harvesting a lot of the gains this year and possibly saving some of the losses for next year or future years that people may have. We can go on to the next slide. On the estate taxes front, now, Biden stated that he would just let the 2025 reversion happen from the pre-Tax Cuts and Job Act, approximately 5 million plus inflation mark. But that actually, we've heard a little bit more lately that could actually even roll back to 3.5 million. So there's nothing hard stated about that. That's just some of the thought that's out there. So because of that and eliminating the current step up in basis on inherited assets, we are going through a process of analyzing if clients should be doing a lot more of immediate gifting to their beneficiaries of things that were intended to be passed at death. So of course, that's something that your CPA and attorney that can help you out with more. But that's one of the strategies that we're working on right now. On the next slide, we start talking about the individual tax rates. Now, Biden did say he would restore the 39.6 rate for taxable income above the 400,000. And again, this represents only that top tax rate, and that so it does create the opportunity that if there's a way to accelerate some of the income from future years that could be taken into this year, there are clients that we're trying to help out and bring that forward to try to take advantage of that. Now, again, these are all just stated goals that they said they were going to have depending on what happens with some of the runoff and so forth in the election. We'll see if that takes place. On the next slide, we talk about itemized deductions. Now this is kind of a big one because there's a lot of strategies that stay in place here. Biden did say that he would cap the benefit of itemized deductions at 28%. But a bigger deal for a lot of people is that Charles Schumer talked about repealing the state and local tax cap at 10,000. So, not that it's just him or he carries all of that. And it sounded like it was supported by Biden that he might want to do that as well. But right now, that does allow us to employ some different strategies while it's still there. So, of course, some of this can change after we find out what happens in January. But for now, just to be protective, we are putting some things in place. So just number one, a really simple one is if you will be itemizing in 2021, then just postpone your fourth quarter estimate tax payment into January of this coming year. In a little bit, we're going to talk about the bunching strategy, which is a really important one right now that came up. And with that SALT cap in place, it becomes all the more. So on the next slide, we start talking about the CARES Act. Now, the CARES Act was put into place, in this past year. It includes significant tax relief and charitable giving benefits that are really helpful to long cash-strapped nonprofits. So with that, it makes a new charitable deduction available to individual taxpayers that don't itemize their deductions. So this new benefit, it's also referred to as the universal deduction, but it allows for a charitable deduction above the line, meaning this $300 is deducted from an individual taxpayer's income prior to the calculation of their adjusted gross income. So this is one of the charitable benefits that will extend beyond the 2020 tax year. And it does not negatively impact QCDs, luckily, or the bunching strategy that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So for itemizers, people that are planning on itemizing soon, the adjusted gross income limit for cash contributions was increased. So for the contributions made in 2020 only now for this time, individuals can elect to deduct up to 100% of their AGI, and that increased from what used to be 60%. So they do allow that you can choose when you're putting a contribution in, does it fall into that 60 or does it fall into the 40% above that? So what you can do is you can take that first 60% and put it into your donor advised fund. But one of the stipulations they put on the next 40% is it has to go direct to a charitable organization. Now, of course, the community foundation can help you find outlets for that themselves, of course, but a lot of the charities that are worked with or local can also be recipients. So one of the things that we're helping people do for people that really want to maximize this, we're doing large Roth conversions to let somebody raise their AGI up, which allows them to maximize that 100% giving that they can do this year. Your giving then is bigger, your Roth is bigger. And as we're going to talk about here in just a little bit with the Secure Act, with the IRA stretch going away, this move becomes even more popular and a big one. So, but the contributions that are eligible right now for individual or corporate donors to receive this benefit, it must be a qualified cash contribution to the public charities. The increased limits apply only to cash. So that means contributions of property or real estate or marketable securities don't apply to that amount that goes above the 60%. And stock donations are still limited to 30. So on the next slide, we talk about the Secure Act. Now, what we just talked about, the Secure Act does remove the stretch rules. So for non-spouse beneficiaries of an inherited IRA or other retirement accounts. Now, there are exceptions to this 10-year rule: surviving spouses, chronically ill heirs, disabled heirs. So if you're the beneficiary of an inherited IRA or a 401k and the original owner passed away prior to January 1st of 2020, no changes are needed. Required minimum distributions also now are required to start at 72 instead of 70 and a half. If you turned 70 and a half in 2020 or after, that's when this takes effect. So if you did, it probably would make sense to go review the strategy that you have with your financial advisor and your CPA, kind of look at what some different options would be. One good thing is the IRA contributions no longer have an age limit of 70 and a half. So you can continue putting contributions into your traditional IRA past age 70 and a half, as long as you're still working. Now, this brings traditional IRAs closer to alignment with Roth IRAs or 401k plans. So it begins for the 2020 tax year, and you can make a contribution up to April 15th of 2021. Now, the Secure Act did have many other provisions that we're not discussing here, like the ability to take tax-free distributions for a 529 plan or to pay for eligible expenses. But we tried to focus on the things that would probably affect this crowd. So what I want to talk about now is, on the next slide, is the donor advised fund. And this is a piece that it's become a lot more important to utilize these in the last couple of years. They're just more impactful. So if anyone has ever grown frustrated finding receipts for donations when it comes time to prepare for your tax return, the simplicity of a donor advised fund is just an amazing solution. So one of the other things that we see clients really like about it is seeing their investments inside of that continue to grow, and they get to continue to pay out to their charities of their choice. So, and that they don't pay tax on that growth. That really makes them happy. Another thing about donor advised funds, for those of you listening today that don't like the AMT or the alternative minimum tax, and you know who you are, your contributions to a donor advised fund will reduce that AMT impact. Now, the biggest one, and we'll talk about that next, is how impactful it is to have a donor advised fund and take advantage of the bunching strategy. So on the next screen, we talk about bunching. So gifts into your donor advised fund are tax deductible. So you can combine 2 to 3 years of charitable contributions into one calendar year in order to exceed the standard deduction in that year. You can then use the assets in the donor advised fund to consistently support your favorite charities, even in the years that you took the standard deduction. So in this scenario, what you're seeing is how a married couple filing jointly, who would typically give $5,000 a year to a charity, can benefit from bunching their charitable contributions into a $15,000 donation every 3 years. So in this example, the couple itemizes in years 1 and 4, and then takes the standard deduction in years 2, 3, 5, and 6. So again, combining the use of a donor advised fund with the bunching strategy or some of these other things that we're doing right now, it just makes that donor advised fund so useful to have. And they are simple. And like I said, the benefits of the organization and so forth is just great. So with that, we'll hand it off to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Paul. We really appreciate that, grounding us again in good tax preparation and tax thinking as it leads into charitable gifting. So it is my privilege to welcome and introduce Doug Kveene, who is a donor with us here at the Willmar Area Community Foundation. And Doug and I are going to have a little chat in a few minutes about his charitable gifting strategy. But by way of introduction, Doug is a professional advisor himself for over 20 years. After a career in the Air Force, Doug and his wife, Julie, have 3 children and 10 grandchildren. And Doug is active with a variety of service clubs and nonprofits in our community. And he always says he aspires, his great aspiration in life is to have all of those board meetings taking place from the beach in Hawaii. And I tell Doug I'm down with that whenever we're ready to make that happen here at the Community Foundation. So Doug, thanks for joining us here today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
And so my first question to you, Doug, is if you would tell us just a little bit about the strategy and the decisions that you and your wife, Julie, were exploring that led you to the idea of creating a donor advised fund.
Okay, sure will. As I was thinking about this, you know, one of the key decisions anybody has to make first and foremost is whether they want to be charitable or not charitable. And Julie and I were both very fortunate to grow up in families where our parents were charitably minded and throughout their entire lives. So we grew up with those great role models that were, you know, just showing us how to be charitable, both in time and resources and financially as well. And so today that just comes naturally for Julie and myself. Well, then it comes to the question of how do you be charitably minded or how do you give? And, you know, as some people would do, they just simply write out a check. Others do a qualified charitable distribution, QCD. We've seen a lot of that in the last couple of years since the tax laws changed. Some people like to do their charitable donations in kind. Legacy planning plays a big role in this too, and donor advised funds are what we're focused on today. So for Julie and myself, over the past, 4 years ago, I really didn't even know what a donor advised fund was. However, Sarah would be, you know, good to tell you that she has been teaching all of us in Willmar, all of us professional allies. We're looking at attorneys and CPAs and advisors alike. She's teaching us about donor advised funds. So we've been talking about this for a number of years. And so I was able to bring some acquaintances by and put together some donor advised funds for them. And so in the process of doing that, I mentioned to my wife, maybe this might be a strategy that we should look at, especially after the tax law changed and we were no longer able to itemize per se, because we didn't have mortgage interest anymore or anything like that, those big boulders that you might put into your Schedule A. But, and so along the way, then we conferred with our tax advisor, we talked to Sarah. I think I even had a conversation with our attorney, and we decided that a donor advised fund would be a good strategy to implement.
So Doug, we know that there are different options for establishing a donor advised fund in our markets. And why did you choose to partner with your community foundation to execute your donor advised fund, and how is that working for you?
Right. And so for us, it was I think a very easy choice just because of our familiarity with the Willmar Area Community Foundation. You're right. There are other avenues that one could go to. And I think that our relationship with you, Sarah, and with the Community Foundation and with the professional allies, I just felt like this was an extremely well-run program, and I liked the investment choices, and that certainly the price was reasonable, I thought, in terms of what we would have to pay for this service. But what I really like, and I just did this past weekend, Julie and I went through our year-end gifting strategy, and I sent Sarah a letter and I said, here are our final 6 charities to give to. Would you please send a check out? And now I don't have to worry about it.
Exactly. That is, you hired us to take care of that for you, and that is exactly what we're trying to do. So Doug, you mentioned a little bit about fees. And of course, that the Community Foundation does need to charge a fee to donors. Can you talk a little bit about how you and Julie view the fees that you're charged by the Community Foundation for your DAF?
Sure. Well, you're exactly right. There's nothing out there that's for free. And if it is free, let the buyer beware. But I feel like, what we're paying Community Foundation right now in order to provide this concierge level of service is really very reasonable. It's not at the high end, it's not at the low end, it's right in the middle. And I feel like I'm paying a reasonable amount for this service and getting a lot for it. And so the fees were really not an issue for me in coming to Community Foundation. It was more about the service and how I'm going to be able to execute on our gifting strategy going forward.
Doug, are you and Julie looking at your donor advised fund as a pathway for you in legacy planning to help the next generation in your family to become more philanthropic?
Well, we are probably more than anything else just setting the example. We know that our children observe everything that we do. And so I think that they, in fact, are even moving in that direction a little bit more too. I know our oldest daughter, who's on this broadcast today, she is gifting out to various charities throughout the community too. And she sits on various nonprofit boards as well. And so that's helpful too. So I think that that example is starting to trickle down to our children as well. And I'm hopeful that it will even get down to our grandchildren at some point in time, that they see their parents and their grandparents all doing this together.
Great. Thank you, Doug. You know, as a professional advisor yourself, I know that you have to always think about advantageous partnerships that benefit your clients. And in this case, you were a client yourself. So if you could sum up for other professional advisors, maybe a couple of the top advantages that you think of, both yourself as a donor and when you're thinking about making comments to friends and family, what do you think the biggest advantages are of partnering with the Community Foundation versus maybe a commercial gift fund?
Well, obviously, I think just like in any business, all of us in the professional community, we have our reputations. Okay, we have good names in the communities, and when we're working with other agencies, other community, or with you as a community foundation, that good name goes a long way for credibility and legitimacy. And you know, we only have one chance to make a good impression the first time, and that's what our community foundation does. And so that's what I look for. I look to see that they are professional, that they do what they say they're going to do. You know, and if we have to make some changes in strategy or something like that, we can actually have a conversation about it and do that together. You know, and so I always like to work in teams. With our community foundation, with you, Sarah. I like to work with our legal team. I like to work with our tax preparation team. It's all teams, you know, and everything works together. And just with the Allies group, just knowing the people in this community, high level of trust in them because we've rubbed elbows, we've worked together on many different projects. It just makes it really easy and just have a high level of confidence in their abilities to advise me as well as my ability to advise them.
Well, thank you, Doug. I appreciate that. It has really been our honor to help you and Julie execute your charitable gifting strategy personally, and it's been very fun to get to know you. One of the things that the community foundations all do is we try and get to know our donors and determine what it is that our donors' goals are, what led them to establish the fund, and maybe areas of interest. And so one of the things that Doug and Julie and I are working on right now is mapping out the areas of interest that they have, and figuring out ways that the community foundation can help make sure that they are aware of needs in the community beyond what might be their normal charitable gifting patterns to normal community efforts that they have funded in the past, and allowing them to make their decisions about if that's something they would want to support as well. And so that is part of that. Doug calls it concierge level service, which is what I call it as well. So that is part of what you hire the community foundation to bring to your family and to bring to your clients, everyone, when you are referring someone to the community foundation. So Paul, there is a follow-up question about donor advised funds that I thought maybe you should answer. And that is, Doug gave the story about what led he and Julie to establishing a donor advised fund. Can you think about other life events or taxable events that might be advantageous for a prospective donor to consider a donor advised fund?
Yeah, absolutely. The times that we see them established the most is when somebody goes through the sale of a business that was oftentimes their primary source of income, or they're selling a certain asset or a property or something that created a large capital gain. Maybe they've got a time that they just had a large amount of a stock that did really well, and it's time to maybe diversify some of that stock away, but instead of doing that, possibly moving that stock into the donor advised fund before it's liquidated. So you get to get a little two birds with one stone on that one. So there's a lot of reasons when it comes to, especially with years where you have one large tax event like that business sale, like a big property sale that would push you up into a lot higher tax bracket, or just straight trying to get that started. There's reasons to even look for. So I'm sure a lot of people out there have that stock that just sits there and they don't want to take the gains on it, things like that. So yep, quite a few reasons to do it.
Thank you. We actually take stock gifts. We take real estate gifts. We have worked with business owners who are liquidating their businesses at the time of sale. So these are all strategies that the Community Foundation is fluent in and is happy to assist you all as professional advisors when that moment is at hand for your clients to help determine their pathway. So another question, Paul, that was texted to me privately is, can you say a little bit about why you think a donor advised fund might be more advantageous to families than establishing a private family foundation?
I think it's the level of flexibility that you get, or areas where it can be shared with others outside. And I think that's it. Now, the donor advised fund, I think, also is something that may not fall under some of the same rules in the future. So I think there's, keeping with that flexibility, and maybe we do have people that have both for some of that reason. But at this time right now, I think it is just the flexibility of the things that you're able to do with it, but also including people outside of the family in it.
Thank you. I'd also want to say that flexibility and concierge level service that comes with the donor advised fund is not an inherent thing about grant making and community impact for a community in a family foundation. So there is essentially when you hire the community foundation to help you with your donor advised fund, you also get our bench strength around grant making and community needs that come along with that. So that is may not be an inherent thing at the time when it's being set up, but it ends up often being a big advantage to donors.
I would agree. Oops, sorry to interrupt. I would agree. And a lot of times people, once they get into it, they don't know what they don't know. And that's a reason that they oftentimes are afraid to start some of the giving, or I don't know what I would do with it. Well, the Family Foundation doesn't have a person, like you said, there to explain that to you like you guys do.
Right. I see that there is a question in the chat box, and so I'll read that for everyone. And it says, with the bunching strategy, is community giving okay with the value of the fund declining via annual donations that go out to charities, or are there distribution limits required to maintain the fund value? And I'm wondering if I could actually toss that question to one of my colleagues, Carl Samp. Carl, would you be willing to answer that question live for our audience?
Sure. Actually, donors can set up a donor advised fund either as a flexible fund or an endowed or annual payout fund. And with the flexible fund, you're allowed to make a grant for the total amount of the fund if you choose, or any amount up to that. So that is, that flexibility is there for donors to make those gifts. So that's why bunching is a great idea. So you can make the larger gift one year, take the itemized deduction that year, and then maybe grant that all out in the next 5 years while you take the standard deduction, and then you can just repeat that process again. So.
Right, exactly. We allow funds to come in at a smaller level than a private family foundation. It often requires to make financial sense. But as Carl mentioned, these are flexible funds 90% of the time. So we don't want dollars sitting here not doing good in the community. We want those dollars back out into the community, floating more boats, we like to say at Community Giving. So that is all okay. Doug, a question came in via the chat feature that I thought was interesting for you to try with your donor approach, and that is there's a significant effort to a shop local movement about small businesses and choosing skilled professionals that are right here in your hometown. Can you talk a little bit about how you view the Community Foundation in the shop context of the shop local movement for philanthropic support?
Well, I sure can. In fact, I do like the idea of shopping local. A big part of that, of course, is that you get to go and see the people face to face as a rule, just simply due to the fact that they're in town. If you go out of town, there's sometimes that level of accountability isn't there if you don't see them on the street or in the grocery store or at church or in the schools. I like the idea of shopping local for that reason. There's an added level of accountability, in my opinion.
Thank you. Carol Turno is one of my colleagues with the Central Minnesota Community Foundation. And Carol, I was wondering if you might jump in and offer a sneak peek, kind of a behind the scenes, as to what happens at the community foundations when a referral comes in from one of our professional advisors to try and help their client establish a fund. What do we do and how fast do we move and how do we generally work?
Absolutely. Love to answer that, Sarah. We try to be as responsive as possible, and we can set up a donor advised fund very quickly. And it depends on what the professional advisor feels comfortable with and the donor. We have had situations where we have a donor interview form that we can give to the professional advisor, and they can help their client through that process. It always works best for us to be able to actually get to meet those donors before they set up the fund, just to be able to find out what their interests are and be able to help to further direct them with ideas if that's what they're interested in. So it also helps because a lot of changes happen in a donor advised fund over the years. They may begin with the idea that they want their children to be successors and then change their mind later to be a designated fund and list nonprofits. Those are things that we want to be nimble with our donors and be able to provide them that quick service. And we want them to be comfortable with being able to call us and just chat about what their needs are.
Again, concierge level service that looks different by the client and the donor. You as professional advisors should know that while we have a standard suite of services and the kinds of ways that we approach things, what we do with you and your client who becomes our donor is customized. So it is, as Carol just mentioned, it's completely right-sized for what they're looking for and their unique needs.
Sarah, I'd also like to mention something that Paul had brought up kind of subtly, and that was that, donor advised funds are being looked at as, are they set up properly according to the IRS rules. We always find it interesting, and we have the Minnesota Council on Foundations that we work with too, to help to support our viewpoints on how a donor advised fund works. And private foundations, have a payout of 5% required. I think it's important for all of you to know that our donor advised funds pay out at between 15 and 20% a year. So we always kind of smile when we hear that, they want to increase the amount of money that's going out of donor advised funds. And the one thing that people maybe don't understand is that donor advised funds are fluid, meaning that money is always coming into the fund and going out. So even though the balances may raise, more than likely it's the fact that we have more donor advised funds participating than it is that anybody's holding assets.
Great point, Carol. Whenever we crunch the math, we always exceed the minimum in our donor advised fund payouts. So we know we're doing good work with our donors, but it's gratifying to see that even some of the changes that are being discussed at a congressional level really wouldn't impact us at all, because we are already running ahead of that bar. Paul, this question came in. You early in your presentation talked about the gifting of assets that were originally intended to transfer on death, and that right now is a really good time, particularly, to give a second look at some of those assets and think about whether or not they should be gifted now. Could you say just a little bit more about what kinds of assets or what kinds of scenarios would be particularly advantageous for advisors to take a look at with their clients?
Sure. Actually, anything that it could be investments that were looked at to be left out there. It could be parts of a business. It could be a big one right now that we see a lot of clients working on is transfer of real estate. For the reason that if it's not going to get a step up in basis, and we'll see a lot of farmers, and there might be a farm exclusion that goes along with this. We don't know, because none of this has fully taken effect, right? It's just been proposed from an election. But a farm that if there was going to be a step up in basis, or a business that was going to transfer, any growth that's going to be there in the future is now under the new generation. And so it's just trying to minimize the impact of when that happens. So they're going to use up some of their estate exemption and so forth, but doing that now and having the growth happen for future generations is what they're trying to accomplish. So the things that probably are being done are things that would be the fastest appreciating, versus something that was, not going up in value a lot, just a family keepsake or something. That's not generally what we're talking about. We're talking about those fast appreciating assets.
Thank you. Paul, one question that came in via the chat box was, what thoughts do you have about the topic Carol and I were just discussing on the criticism of donor advised funds and the postulating around required minimum payouts and that kind of thing? From your seat on the bus, how do you view that topic?
So right now, what I think was really important was helping out the cash strapped nonprofit organizations that are out there. And I think that trying to forward some of that through this new legislation of like on the increase up to 100,000 of AGI, and you could only use the 40% to go right to the charities. And I understand what they're trying to do there, but also, giving families the ability to try to make some of these large donations when they can, I think in the end is actually really beneficial to the whole philanthropic community. Trying to limit some of that, that money might go somewhere else, but if it goes in taxes rather than to a charity, or it is a struggle for a lot of people, right? Because they don't want big tax dodges or people that have a lot of money to be able to use loopholes. But I think that's the problem, is maybe just a lack of education on, this isn't a loophole. This is a a great strategy to help out a lot of people in a big way, and taking that away for fear that it's just a loophole for somebody that's wealthy isn't true. As you saw, as we're talking about, those of us that, right now, maybe somebody isn't itemizing anymore that used to, but still can utilize some of these strategies. That's where I think it's probably just a little bit more education that's needed for some.
Say,
Thank you.
Sarah.
Yes.
So along those same lines, I remembered that, with our donor advised funds, the community foundation can also be a recipient of that donor advised fund as well. And what I really liked was that here in Wilmer, our local contributed to 16 different nonprofits and charities that needed help. And I certainly don't know who they all are, but you're in a much better position to identify needs throughout the community. And so I know that my dollars go to work in a very broad way when I contribute to you in the community foundation.
Thank you, Doug. Yeah, we absolutely have both our donor approach and we have our community approach that happens simultaneously at the community foundation. So when you support the community foundation through establishing a fund and or making a gift directly to us, you by proxy are then benefiting all of the charitable causes that we work alongside as well. So it is a trickle through effect where a dollar turns over here at the community foundation and does good work also in the community. It's not unlike, and going back to that whole shop local idea, it's not unlike, we have clients could choose to do business with, do their own taxes, for example, and not use a tax advisor locally, or use Rocket Lawyer. But it's better if they think about the impact of those dollars being invested alongside people right here in their community who have the specific expertise that they need. And we're not really any different in those industries. We're just happen to be in the charitable sector. So there is a question in here from Jeremy, and I think we'll give this to Paul. And Doug, if you have anything you'd like to comment on it afterwards, that would be great. So asking us to comment on using required minimum distributions to fund a donor advised fund, because advisors and clients think that they can fund a DAF through that required minimum distribution because it then becomes a qualified charitable distribution. But we know that there are some challenges with that. So Paul, you want to take a crack at that one?
Sure. A quick conversation with your CPA would probably, quickly educate you that there's much better things to be able to put in there than trying to move money that way. It doesn't work the same way. A QCD is generally something that goes direct. The other ways that you're better able to fund are with things that had capital gain. So it's just finding the right things to be able to put in there. But no, the QCD can count towards RMDs, things like that. But it wouldn't count as something that would go into your donor advised fund.
Correct. We actually take QCDs to support the mission of the community foundation or to support a specific kind of fund that is not a donor advised fund. So we can set them up in a designated fund where the donors pre-select charities that they would want to contribute to at the period of time that they tell us about that. So it might be at death, it might be hold the assets for 5 years and then start paying out. So we can do field of interest funds, we can do other kinds of funds with required minimum distributions / QCDs, but we cannot do donor advised funds at this time. Okay, so Carl, my colleague Carl up in the Brainerd Lakes area gave me a nudge to talk a little bit about corporate advised funds. And I thought I'll actually let Carl do that because that is a little known component of what your community foundation can do for you. So Carl, do you want to chat a little bit about corporate advised funds, and maybe Carol can jump in too and talk about how the ways that we're making those tools work in the St. Cloud area in particular. So Carl?
Yeah, sure. Sounds good. And Paul, you can set me straight if I get off track here. So sure, much like an individual or a family can set up a donor advised fund, a business can set up a corporate advised fund. in very much the same way. So in the same manner is, that it's a good time. So if it's been a great year profit-wise and you're going to be susceptible to higher taxes, that might be the year to set up a corporate advised fund and then do your support in the community, your charitable giving in your community through that fund. And the real advantage of that, I think, comes from the accounting side, where the business just makes that one gift, takes that one tax receipt on that, tax advantageous year. And then in future years, they can be giving off of that fund and not worry about tracking those donations anymore, because they've already taken the deduction. So plus we write the check if the gift is over $250. So they could just tell us, we want to support XYZ charities, or the event at the gala event at somewhere, or something like that. And all those things that businesses tend to be very supportive in our local communities, they can do that through a corporate advised fund.
I'll
Great,
just
thanks.
add a little bit to that, Sarah, if you don't mind. My experience is, well, first I'll start with when I had my own accounting office years ago, I used to get hit constantly by people coming in asking me for contributions. So having a corporate advice fund for a smaller organization is a great way to control what you have available to give philanthropically. We have seen small companies take a percentage of their profits and put that into their donor advice fund annually. And they may have a small committee of staff then, so it helps the company feel like they are a part of the decisions. Then they review ideas and then go ahead and make recommendations. We also have one corporate advised fund that has a grant round that they do, and they let us implement it. That particular company gets about 100 applications for their grant round. We then review those applications and reduce it down to about 25 based on what their criteria is, and then give it back to the company to make that decision. It saves them a lot of time. We also are the ones that send out the grant letter to those places. And if there's any questions about whether or not or why they weren't funded, our foundation is the one that answers those questions. So it can help the company to kind of remove themselves from the middle of that negativity that can happen when you have to say no to someone. So
Exactly. That is one of the components of what you hire when you hire the community foundation, is we do the due diligence checking for you on potential grantees. And if there is a problem, we work with you to find the best pathway forward to accomplish your goal. We also, it's not unheard of for us to find that a grantee a donor wants to impact has had a lapse in their 501c3 status or something of that nature. And then we come alongside those local nonprofits and try and help them resolve that issue that they may not even be aware of. And so many times the community doesn't see the community foundation doing that work, but we do that every day. We have an entire grants and scholarships team that does nothing but checking on these kinds of things and ensure that these payouts, these grants, and this due diligence is executed on behalf of all of our donors and our funds.
And again, our goal always is to be able to design something within the philanthropic guidelines, but be able to design it so it works for the company. So we can look at ones that want to do a grant round versus ones who really just want to be able to put a certain percentage in and have a small committee make decisions, or us make the decisions for them based on a field of interest that they have. So there's a lot of flexibility that we're able to do because we're all about relationship building. We want to do what works best for you as well as what works best for our community as well.
Great. Thank you to all of our panelists and my colleagues who were willing to jump in and help answer some questions that were coming through in the chat and the Q&A. And so at this time, I will hand it back to my colleague, Carl Stamp with the Brainerd Lakes Area Community Foundation for some closing comments. Carl.
Great, thank you, Sarah. I think she's practicing for a talk show host. She does a great job with that. We really want to thank Paul and Doug for sharing your expertise with us in the audience today. And we thank everyone for joining us today. I hope you do talk to your clients about their charitable goals when you meet with them and what good they want to do with their wealth. So we just encourage you to do that and just know that actually professional advisors who do that have about 67% more word of mouth referrals than those who don't talk to their clients about that. So it's a valued, it's something that's valued by clients. So we encourage you to reach out to your local community giving executive director. The 4 of us are listed here. And if you're outside of that, you can get a hold of anybody, any one of us, we can help you get connected to someone. We do have a lot of resources on our website that we encourage you to use. You can see any of our past webinars on our website, which is communitygiving.org. Community Connections is where the list of webinars are. And one of those that we did recently in late October that Paul helped us with on that as well was one on estate planning. And I see that Renee and Laura from Green in Person are on the webinar today, and they also were contributors to that, and we appreciate their support. You can also see there that plangiving.communitygiving.org has a variety of great resources and information about charitable giving and plan giving, including a calculator for clients who might want to create a charitable gift annuity. So you can plug in their ages and amount they're looking at it. It can tell you approximately what the tax deduction will be in the payout will be for that, the percentage rate. So you can also find more about any of our grant making programs at communitygiving.org, grants. And we've also been doing a series of webinars related to COVID as well. And you can see there, communitygiving.org /COVID-19 is where you find information on that. So we encourage you to use that website and contact our staff for any assistance. So we encourage your feedback at info@communitygiving.org. If you've got an idea for a webinar or anything you want to share about today, you can do that there as well. So once again, thank you for joining us. Our next webinar will be in January. We don't have the specifics on that right now, so stay tuned. We'll be getting information out on that. So thanks again. Have a great holiday season to you all, and stay well, please.